Donald Trump, President of the United States. Donald Trump, in full, Donald John Trump, born June 14th, 1946, New York, New York, U.S., 45th President of the United States, 2017 dash. Trump was a real estate developer and a businessman who owned, managed, or licensed his name to several hotels, casinos, golf courses, resorts, and residential properties in New York City area and around the world. From the 1980s, Trump also lent his name to scores of retail ventures, including branded lines of clothing, cologne, food, and furniture, and to Trump University, which offered seminars in real estate education from 2005 to 2010. In the early 21st century, his private conglomerate, the Trump Organization, comprised of some 500 companies, involved a wide range of businesses, including hotels, resorts, residential properties, merchandise, and entertainment and television. In 2019, Trump became the only third president in the United States history after Andrew Johnson in 1868 and Bill Clinton in 1998 to be impeached by the United States House of Representatives. He was also the first president to be impeached during his first term in office. Early life and business career. Trump was the fourth of five children of the Frederick Fred Christ Trump, a successful real estate developer, and Mary MacLeod. Donald's eldest sister, Marianne Trump Barry, eventually served as a United States District Court judge in 1983 to 99, and later as a judge on the United States Courts of Appeal for the Third Circuit until her retirement in 2011. His elder brother, Frederick Jr., Freddie, worked briefly for his father's business before becoming an airline pilot in the 1960s. Freddie's alcoholism led to his early death in 1981 at the age of 43. Beginning in the late 1920s, Fred Trump built hundreds of single-family houses in row houses in the Queens and Brooklyn area boroughs of New York City, and from the late 1940s, he built thousands of apartment units, mostly in Brooklyn, using federal loan guarantees designed to stimulate the construction of affordable housing. During World War II, he also built federally backed housing for naval personnel and shipyard workers in Virginia and Pennsylvania. In 1954, Fred was investigated by the Senate Banking Committee for allegedly abusing the loan guarantee program by deliberately overestimating the cost of his construction projects to secure larger loans from commercial banks, enabling him to keep the difference between the loan amounts and his actual construction costs. In testimony before the Senate committee in 1954, Fred admitted that he had built the Beach Haven apartment complex in Brooklyn for $3.7 million less than the amount of his government-insured loans. Although he was not charged with any crime, he was thereafter unable to obtain federal loan guarantees. A decade later, a New York State investigation found that Fred had used his profit on a state-insured construction loan to build a shopping center that was entirely his own property. He eventually returned the $1.2 million to the state, but was thereafter unable to obtain state loan guarantees for residential projects in the Coney Island area of Brooklyn. Donald Trump attended the New York Military Academy from 1959 to 64, a private boarding school, Fordham University in Bronx, 1964 to 66, and the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Finance and Commerce, 1966 to 68, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in economics. In 1968, during the Vietnam War, he secured a diagnosis of bone spurs, which qualified him for medical exemption from the military draft. He had earlier received 4 deferments for education. Upon his graduation, Trump began working full-time for his father's business, helping to manage its holdings of rental housing, then estimated at between 10,000 and 22,000 units. In 1974, he became president of the conglomeration of Trump-owned corporations and partnerships, which he later named the Trump Organization. During the 1960s and early 1970s, Trump owned housing developments in New York City, Cincinnati, Ohio, Norfolk, Virginia, were the target of several complaints of racial discriminations against African Americans and other minority groups. In 1973, Fred and Donald Trump, along with their company, were sued by the United States Department of Justice for allegedly violating the Fair Housing Act, 1968, in the operation of 39 apartment buildings in the New York City. The Trumps initially countersued the Justice Department for $100 million, alleging harm to their reputation. The suit was settled 2 years later under an agreement that did not require the Trumps to admit guilt. In the late 1970s and 1980s, Donald Trump greatly expanded his father's business by investing in luxury hotels and residential properties and by shifting its geographic focus to Manhattan and later to Atlantic City, New Jersey. In doing so, he relied heavily on loans, gifts, and other financial assistance from his father, as well as on his father's political connections in New York City. In 1976, he purchased the decrepit Commodore Hotel, Grand Central Station, under a complex profit-sharing agreement with the city that included a 40-year-old property tax abatement. The first such tax break granted to a commercial property in New York City, relying on a construction loan guaranteed by his father in the Hyatt Corporation, which became a partner in the project. Trump refurbished the building and reopened it in 1980 as the 1,400-room Grand Hyatt Hotel. In 1983, he opened Trump Tower, an office, retail, residential complex constructed in partnership with the Equitable Life Assurance Company. The 58-story building on 56th Street and 5th Avenue eventually contained Trump's Manhattan residence and the headquarters of the Trump Organization. Other Manhattan properties developed by Trump during the 1980s included the Trump Plaza Residential Cooperative in 1984, the Trump Park Luxury Condominium Complex 1986, and the 19-story Plaza Hotel 1988, a historic landmark for which Trump paid more than $400 million. In the 1980s, Trump invested heavily in the casino business in Atlantic City, where his properties eventually included Harrah's at Trump Plaza 1984, later renamed Trump Plaza, Trump's Castle Casino Resort 1985, and the Trump Taj Mahal 1990s, then the largest casino in the world. During that period, Trump also purchased the New York Jersey Generals, a team in the short-lived United States Football League, Mar-a-Lago, in a 118-room mansion in Palm Beach, Florida, built in the 1920s by the Cyril Harris Marjorie Merriweather Post, a 282-foot yacht, then the world's second largest, which he named the Trump Princess, and an East Coast air shuttle service, which he called Trump Shuttle. In 1977, Trump married Ivana Zelnikova Winklemer, a Czech model with whom he had 3 children, Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric, before the couple divorced in 1992. Their married life, as well as Trump's business affair, were a staple of the tabloid press in New York City during the 1980s. Trump married the American actress Marla Maples after she gave birth to Trump's 4th child, Tiffany, in 1993. Their marriage ended in divorce in 1999. In 2005, Trump married the Slovene model Melina Knus, and their son Baron was born the following year. Melania Trump became only the second foreign-born First Lady of the United States upon Trump's inauguration as president in 2017. When the United States economy fell into recession in the 1990s, many of Trump's businesses suffered, and he soon had trouble making payments on his approximately $5 billion debt, some of $900 million of which he had personally guaranteed. Under a restructuring agreement with several banks, Trump was forced to surrender his airline, which was taken over by the United States Airway in 1992, to sell Trump Princess, to take out a second or third mortgage on nearly all of his properties, and to reduce his ownership stakes in them, and to commit himself to living on a personal budget of $450,000 a year. Despite those measures, the Trump Taj Mahal declared bankruptcy in 1991, and two other casinos owned by Trump, as well as his Plaza Hotel in New York City, went bankrupt in 1992. Following those setbacks, most major banks refused to do any further business with him. Estimates of Trump's net worth during this period ranged from 1.7 billion dollars to minus 900 million dollars. Trump's fortunes rebounded with the stronger economy of the later 1990s and with the decision of the Frankfurt-based Deutsche Bank AG to establish a presence in the United States commercial real estate market. The Deutsche Bank extended hundreds of millions of dollars in credit to Trump in the late 1990s and the 2000s for projects including Trump World Tower 2001 in New York and Trump International Hotel and Tower 2009 in Chicago. In the early 1990s, Trump had floated a plan to his creditors to convert his Mar-a-Lago estate into a luxury housing development consisting of several smaller mansions, but local opposition led him instead to turn it into a private club, which was opened in 1995 and 1996. Trump partnered with NBC Television to purchase the Miss Universe organization, which produced the Miss Universe, Miss USA, and Miss Teen USA beauty pageants. Trump Casino's business continued to struggle. However, in 2004, his company, Trump Hotels and Casino Resorts, filed for bankruptcy after several of its properties accumulated unmanageable debt, and the same company, renamed Trump Entertainment Resort, went bankrupt again in 2009. In addition to his real estate ventures, in 2004, Trump premiered a reality television series in which he starred The Apprentice, which featured teams of contestants competing in various business-related projects, with a single contestant ultimately winning a lucrative one-year contract as Trump employee apprentice. The Emmy-nominated show, in which Trump fired one or more contestants on a weekly basis, helped him further to enhance his reputation as a shrewd businessman and self-made billionaire. In 2008, the show was revamped as The Celebrity Apprentice, with newsmakers and entertainers as the contestants. Trump marketed his name as a brand in numerous other business ventures, including Trump Financial, a mortgage company, and the Trump Entrepreneur Initiative, formerly Trump University, an online education company focusing on real estate investments and entrepreneurialism. The latter firm, which ceased operating in 2011, was the target of a class action lawsuit by former students and a separate action by the Attorney General of New York State, alleging fraud. After initially denying the allegations, Trump settled the lawsuit for $25 million in November of 2016. In 2019, more than 2 years into his presidency, Trump agreed to pay $2 million in damages and to admit guilt to settle another lawsuit by the Attorney General of New York that had accused him of illegally using assets from his charity, the Trump Foundation, to fund his 2016 presidential campaign. As part of the settlement, the Trump Foundation was dissolved. In 2018, the New York Times published a lengthy investigative report that documented how Fred Trump had regularly transferred vast sums of money, ultimately amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars, to his children by means of strategies involving tax, securities, and real estate fraud, as well as by legal means. According to the project, Donald was the main beneficiary of the transfers, having received the equivalent of in 2018 of $413 million by the early 2000s. Trump was credited as the co-author of a number of books on entrepreneurship and his business career, including Trump, The Art of the Deal, 1987, Trump, The Art of the Comeback, Why We Want You to Be Rich, Trump 101, The Way to Success, and Trump Never Give Up, How I Turned My Biggest Challenges into Success. Politics. From the 1980s, Trump periodically mused in public about running for president, but those moments were widely dismissed in the press as publicity stunts. In 1999, he switched his voter registration from Republican to the Reform Party and established a presidential exploratory committee. Though he ultimately declined to run in 2000, he published a book that year, The America We Deserve, in which he set forth his socially liberal and economically conservative political views. Trump later rejoined the Republican Party, and he maintained a high public profile during the 2012 presidential election. Although he did not run for office at that time, he gained much attention for repeatedly and falsely claiming that the Democratic president was not a naturally born citizen. In June 2015, Trump announced that he would be a candidate in the United States presidential election of 2016, pledging to make America great again. He promised to create millions of new jobs, to punish American companies that exported jobs overseas, to repeal Obama's signature legislative achievement, the Affordable Care Act, ACA, to revive the U.S. coal industry, to drastically reduce the influence of lobbyists in Washington, D.C., drain the swamp, to withdraw the United States from the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change, to impose tariffs on countries that allegedly engaged in trade practices that were unfair to the United States, to construct a wall along the United States-Mexico border, to prevent illegal immigration from Latin America, and to ban immigration by Muslims. Trump mused about those and other issues and crippled America. How to Make America Great Again, 2015. On the campaign trail, Trump quickly established himself as a political outsider, a common strategy among non-incumbent candidates at all levels. In Trump's case, the stance proved popular with conservative voters, especially those in the Tea Party movement. And he frequently topped opinion polls, besting established Republican politicians. However, his campaign was often mired in controversy, much of it of his own making, in speeches and especially via Twitter, a social medium he had used frequently since 2019. Trump regularly made inflammatory remarks, including racist and sexist slurs and insults. Other public comments by Trump, especially those directed at his rivals or detractors in the Republican establishment, were widely criticized for their belligerence by bullying tone and their indulgence in juvenile name-calling. Trump's initial refusal to condemn the Ku Klux Klan after a former Klansman endorsed him also drew sharp criticism, as did his failure to repudiate racist elements among his supporters, including white supremacists, white nationalists, and neo-Nazis. While Trump's comments worried the Republican establishment, his supporters were pleased by his combativeness and his apparent willingness to say whatever came to his mind, a sign of honesty and courage in their estimation. After a loss in Iowa caucus to open up the primary season in February 2016, Trump rebounded by winning the next three contests, and he extended his lead with a strong showing on Super Tuesday when primaries and caucuses were held in 11 states. In early March, after a landslide victory in the Indiana primary in May, Trump became the presumptive Republican nominee as his last two opponents, Ted Cruz and John Kasich, dropped out of the race. In July 2016, Trump announced that Indiana Governor Mike Pence would be his vice presidential running mate. At the Republican National Convention the following week, Trump was officially named the party's nominee. There, he and other speakers harshly criticized the presumptive Democratic nominee, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, blaming her for the 2012 attack on the United States consulate in Benghazi, Libya, and for allegedly having mishandled classified State Department emails by using a private email server. Earlier in July, the FBI announced that an investigation of the Clinton use of email of Secretary of State had determined that her action had been extremely careless but not criminal. A 2019 report by the United States State Department concluding a year-long investigation found no persuasive evidence of systematic, deliberate mishandling of classified information by Clinton. Trump continued his criticisms of Clinton in the ensuing weeks, routinely referring to her as Crooked Hillary and repeatedly vowing to put her in jail if he were elected. Trump's threat to jail his political opponents was unprecedented in modern U.S. political history and was not founded in any constitutional power that the United States president would have. Despite having pledged in 2015 that he would release his tax returns, as every presidential nominee of a major party had done since their 1970s, Trump later refused to do so, explaining that he was under a routine audit by the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, though there was no legal bar to releasing his tax return under audit, as President Richard Nixon had done in 1973. In January 2017, soon after Trump's inauguration as president, as a senior White House official announced that Trump had no intention of releasing his returns. Trump's tax returns and other financial information later became a focus of investigation by the House of Representatives, the District Attorney for Manhattan, and the Attorney General of New York into alleged criminal activity by Trump and his associates. See below Russia investigation. In late July, on the eve of the Democratic National Convention, thousands of internal emails of the Democratic National Committee (DNC) were publicly released by the website WikiLeaks in an apparent effort to damage the Clinton campaign. Reacting to widespread suspicion that the emails had been stolen by Russian hackers, Trump publicly encouraged the Russians to hack Clinton's private email server to find thousands of emails that he claimed had been illegally deleted. Later investigation by the Office of Robert Mueller, the special counsel appointed in 2017 to investigate the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, see below Russian investigated, determined that Russian hackers first attempted to break into the personal email servers of Clinton campaign officials on the same day, only hours after Trump issued his investigation. Following the Democratic convention, Trump continued to make controversial and apparent impromptu comments via Twitter and in other forms that embarrassed the Republican establishment and seriously disputed his campaign. In October 2016, a hot mic video from 2005 surfaced in which he told an entertainment reporter in vulgar language that he had tried to seduce a married woman and that when you're a star, you can do anything, including grabbing women by the genitalia. Although Trump dismissed the conversation as locker room talk, eventually more than 24 women claimed that they had been sexually harassed or assaulted by Trump in the past. Some allegations were made after Trump became the president. During the campaign, Trump and his legal representatives generally denied the allegations and asserted that all the women were lying. They also noted that Bill Clinton had been previously accused by sexual harassment and assault. In part because of the video, Trump's support among women voters, already low, continued to wane. Some Republicans began to withdraw their endorsement. Approximately 1 hour after the release of the Trump video, WikiLeaks published a trove of emails that later investigations determined had been stolen by Russian hackers from the account of John Podesta, Clinton's campaign manager. On the same day, the U.S. intelligence community public announced its assessment of the Russian government had directed efforts by hackers to steal and release sensitive Democratic Party emails and other information in order to bolster the Trump campaign and to weaken public confidence in the United States Democratic institutions, including the news media. In response, Trump attacked the competence and motives of the United States intelligence agencies and insisted that no one really knew who might have been behind the hacking. A secret CIA report to the Congress in December had separated a report ordered by Obama and released in January 2017 also concluded that the Russians had interfered in the election including through the theft and publication of the Democratic Party emails and through a vast public influence campaign that had used fake social media accounts to spread disinformation and create discord among Americans. Despite his ongoing efforts to portray Clinton as crooked and an insider, Trump trailed her in almost all polls. As election day neared, he repeatedly claimed that the evidence was rigged and that the press was treating him unfairly by reporting fake news, a term he used frequently to disparage news reports containing negative information about him. He received no endorsements from major newspapers. During the third and final presidential debate in October, he made headlines when he refused to say that he would accept the election results. 8 days after that debate, the Trump campaign received a boost when the FBI Director James Comey notified Congress that the Bureau was reviewing a trove of emails from an unrelated case that appeared to be relevant to its earlier investigation of Clinton. Trump seized on the announcement as vindication of his charge that Clinton was crooked. 6 days later, Comey announced that the new emails contain no evidence of criminal activity, notwithstanding the damage that Comey revelation had done to her campaign. Clinton retained a slim lead over Trump in polls of battleground states on the eve of Election Day, and most pundits and political analysts remained confident that she would win. When voting proceeded on November 8, 2016, however, Trump bested Clinton in a chain of critical Rust Belt states, and he was elected president. Although Trump won the Electoral College by 304 to 227, and thereby the presidency, he lost the nationwide popular vote by more than 2.8 million. After the election, Trump repeatedly claimed, without evidence, that 3 to 5 million people had voted for Clinton illegally. Trump took the oath of office on January 20th, 2017. Trump's unexpected victory prompted much discussion in the press regarding the reliability of polls and the strategic mistakes of the Clinton campaign. Most analysts agreed that Clinton had taken for granted some of her core constituencies, such as women and minorities, and that Trump had effectively capitalized upon the economic anxieties and racial prejudices of some working class white, particularly men. Presidency. Almost immediately upon taking office, Trump began issuing a series of executive orders designed to fulfill some of his campaign promises and to project an image of swift, decisive action. His first order, signed on his first day as president, directed that all unwarranted economic and regulatory burdens imposed by the ACA should be minimized pending the prompt repeal of that law. 5 days later, he directed the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security to begin planning for the construction of a wall along the country's southern border. An executive order on ethics imposed a 5-year ban on lobbying activities by former executive branch employees, but weakened or removed some lobbying restrictions imposed by the Obama administration. Immigration. One of Trump's most controversial early executive orders, issued on January 27th, implemented his promised Muslim ban, which temporarily suspended immigration to the United States from 7 Muslim-majority countries in the interest of national security. The travel ban, as it came to be known, was immediately challenged in court on statutory and constitutional grounds, i.e., for allegedly violating anti-discrimination and other provisions of the United States Immigration and Nationality Act, for being inconsistent with the due process and establishment of religious clause in the Constitution. The ban also provoked spontaneous demonstrations at major airports in the United States in support of persons with valid visas who were prevented from boarding flight to the United States or who were detained upon arrival of forced to return to their originating countries. In February, a district court in Washington state issued a nationwide temporary restraining order enjoining enforcement of travel ban, which the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit declined to stay. Foreseeing the eventual defeat in the courts, Trump in March issued a second executive order designed to avoid the constitutional pitfalls of the first, which had superseded the second order, also dropped Iraq from the list of targeted countries and narrowed the categories to persons whose travel would be affected. Nevertheless, district courts in Hawaii and Maryland issued preliminary injunctions blocking enforcement of revised travel ban, which were largely upheld in May and June by the Fourth and Ninth Circuit Courts of Appeal, respectively. After agreeing in June to hear the consolidated case during its October 2017 term, the United States Supreme Court significantly narrowed the injunctions, allowing the travel ban to be enforced against foreign nationals who lacked any bona fide relationships with a person or entity in the United States. In September, Trump issued a third version of the ban, which continued to apply to immigrants from 6 Muslim-majority countries, but now include immigrants from North Korea and certain government officials of Venezuela. The Supreme Court then vacated as moot the cases it had been scheduled to hear regarding the second travel ban. The third ban, like the previous two, was immediately challenged and enjoined by the Supreme Court, stayed the injunctions in December pending review by the Fourth and Ninth Circuit, which upheld them. The Ninth Circuit's decision in Trump v. Hawaii was eventually reversed by the Supreme Court in June 2018. In its ruling, the court held, among other things, that the ban was not obviously motivated by unconstitutional religious bias, notwithstanding many public statements by Trump that had indicated otherwise to the lower courts. From at least the early 2010s, the majority of illegal immigration across the United States southern border with Mexico was undertaken by people seeking asylum from violence and persecution from their home countries, especially Central America and Africa. Under the United States immigration law, foreign persons who are physically present in the United States, including those who arrive illegally, are entitled to asylum as refugees, providing that they can establish a credible fear of persecution in their home countries based on their race, religion, and nationality, political opinion, or membership in certain social groups. In April 2018, Trump administration announced what it called a zero-tolerance immigration policy, under which all foreign adults who enter the United States illegal, a misdemeanor for first-time offenders, would be criminally prosecuted. The policy entailed that children and families who illegally cross the United States border together would be taken from their parents or legal guardians and placed in shelters run by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, a division of the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, or private shelters contracted by the ORR. Eventually, according to the HHS policy, separated children would be released to sponsors, parent or close relative, or other suitable persons, or to foster families in the United States. After surrendering their children, parents would be held in the detention centers or jail to await persecution for illegal entry. Under the previous immigration policy, known as the catch and release, migrant families were usually quickly released, allowed to remain together in the United States while their cases were being resolved by immigration authorities. In practice, family separation conducted under the zero tolerance policy were traumatic for both children and parents. The Trump administration had conceived of and initially defended the separations as necessary deterrent to illegal economic immigration by people falsely claiming fear of persecution in their home countries. Trump himself falsely asserted that the separations were required by existing immigration law and blamed Democrats for not changing it, though most own party controlled both houses of the Congress at the time. Soon, however, widely circulated photographs of crying and visibly terrified children confined within fences enclosures resembling cages prompted to international condemnation of the separation policy, as it did eventual news reports of the physical and sexual abuse of some children in shelters and deaths of others from lack of adequate medical care. Facing pressure to act from congressional Republicans in late June, Trump signed an executive order ending the separations. 1 week later, a federal judge in California issued an injunction against further separations and ordered the Trump administration to return all minor children who had been seized under the zero tolerance policy within 30 days. Another facet of its campaign to reduce illegal immigration, the Trump administration also greatly increased arrests of undocumented immigrants by Immigration and Custom Enforcement (ICE), an agency of the Department of Homeland Security. Established in 2003 during the Obama administration, ICE had concentrated on the undocumented immigrants who had serious criminal records, but in January 2017 directed the department to find and arrest and deport all persons without documentations, regardless of how long they have lived in the country or whether they had committed any crimes. ICE officers therefore regularly conducted raids at private homes, churches, schools, courthouses, and job sites and selected locations throughout the country. Both criminal and non-criminal arrests increased nationwide as compared with 2016, but non-criminals arrests constituted a much greater percentage of the total. The raids were condemned by predominant Democrats and civil rights organizations as draconian, wasteful, while some progressive groups proclaimed an abolished ICE movement. At the same time, dozens of cities and towns declared themselves sanctuaries, vowing not to cooperate with ICE and other federal authorities seeking to remove undocumented immigrants from their jurisdictions. Emoluments Clause. During the presidential election campaign, some of Trump's critics had warned that his presidency could create a unique and immediate constitutional crisis because of his possible violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause of the United States Constitution, which generally prohibits federal office holders from accepting gifts, payments, and other items of value from foreign states or rulers without congressional permission. As related constitutional provision known as the Domestic Emoluments Clause specifically prohibits the president from receiving any emoluments from the federal government or the states beyond his official compensation. Trump's vast, complex, and largely secret international business interests, it was argued, could create exactly the kind of conflict of interest the Foreign Endowment Clause was intended to prevent. Unless Trump were to sell his assets or place them in a blind trust, although federal conflict of interest laws did not apply to the president and vice president, several of Trump's immediate predecessors in office had used blind trust or other means to avoid the appearance of conflict of interest. To address such concerns, in January 2017, Trump announced that he would surrender control but not ownership of his company, the Trump Organization, to his sons Donald Jr. and Eric, that the company would undertake no new business deals with foreign countries or the United States government, and that the company would donate the United States Treasury any profits derived from patronage of Trump's properties by foreign governments to an arrangement that failed to satisfy some specialists in government ethics. In late January, a public interest group criticized for responsibility and ethics in Washington Crew, later joined by other plaintiffs, filed suit in a federal district court in Manhattan, alleging that Trump was in violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause. In June, the attorneys general of Maryland and the District of Columbia sued Trump for allegedly having violated both the Foreign and Domestic Emoluments Clause, and soon afterwards, nearly 200 Democratic members of Congress filed a separate suit alleging that by continuing to accept emoluments from foreign countries without consulting Congress, Trump had denied the opportunity to give or withhold their consent as required under the Foreign Emoluments Clause. After the Crew suit was dismissed for lack of standing in court in December, the plaintiffs appealed the case to the Court of Appeals for for the Second Circuit, which had vacated the lower court's judgment in 2019, allowing the suit to proceed to trial. In March and July 2018, a federal district court denied motions by the Trump administration to dismiss the suit by Maryland in the District of Columbia, allowing that case to move forward after issuing a stay of the District Court of Processing. The three-judge panel of the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reversed the District Court rulings and ordered a dismissal of the suit for lack of standing. That ruling, in turn, was set aside in October 2019, where the Fourth Circuit agreed to hear the case in December. Meanwhile, in the suit brought by the Democratic members of Congress, a district court rejected in September 2018 and 2019 the Trump administration motion to dismiss but agree in August 2019 to stay discovery and to allow an immediate appeal of the court's orders after a three-judge panel of the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit remanded the case in July. That panel later argued to hear oral arguments in December on the question of whether the district court had erred in allowing the suit to proceed. In February 2020, it dismissed the suit for lack of standing. Although two of the emolument cases remained unresolved, there was no doubt that Trump was profiting from patronage of his hotels, golf resorts, and other properties by officials of foreign governments, foreign and domestic lobbyists, Republican politicians, and representatives of conservative interest groups, and members of his own administration. It was also apparent that much, if not most, of the business he received from foreign governments and from foreign domestic lobbyists was undertaken under the assumption, justified or not, that Trump would look more favorably upon those who spent money at his properties than upon those who did not. During the first 2 years of his presidency, it became a matter of routine that the persons or groups who wished to influence the Trump administration at high levels, whether the United States was on board, would patronize a Trump-owned property whenever feasible. Trump's properties also received much business from the United States government itself, which was obliged to pay Trump for services and accommodations, e.g. the U.S. Secret Service protection at his golf courses in his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida during his frequent visits to those venues. Supreme Court. In January 2017, Trump made good on his promise to place conservative justices on the Supreme Court by nominating Neil Gorsuch, a judge of the Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, to file the seat that had become vacant with the death of February of Anthony Scalia. Although Obama had put forward Merrick Garland, a judicial moderate, as Scalia's replacement, the majority leader of the Senate, Republican Mitch McConnell, refused to schedule a vote or even hold a hearing on Garland's nomination, preferring to gamble that a Republican would win the election and nominate a more conservative judge. Gorsuch was confirmed by the Senate in April after Senate Republicans overcame a Democratic filibuster by removing the traditional 60-vote minimum needed to end the debate and proceed to vote. In July 2018, Trump nominated another conservative appellate court judge, Brett Kavanaugh of the District Columbia Circuit, to replace retiring Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy in hearings before the Senate Judiciary Committee in September. A childhood acquaintance of Kavanaugh, Christine Blasey Ford, testified that he had sexually molested her when they were underage teens in Maryland and that he was stumbling drunk during the assault. Kavanaugh, who was also accused of separate acts of sexual assault by a former classmate at Yale University, Deborah Ramirez, and a third accuser, Julie Switnick, declared in a sworn statement that Kavanaugh had attended parties at which gang rapes took place. In his own testimony, Kavanaugh angrily denied the allegations, insisting that they were products of conspiracy by Democrats to exact revenge on behalf of the Clintons for Kavanaugh's role as a member of the legal team of independent counsel Kenneth Starr during the later investigation of the 1990s U.S. Bill Clinton's affair with United States intern Monica Lewinsky. A subsequent supplemental investigation by the FBI ordered by Trump was limited in duration and scope. Kavanaugh, Ford, and Swetnick were not interviewed. Dozens of witnesses recommended to the FBI by Ford and Ramirez were not contracted, and repeat offers of collaborating evidence by numerous and other persons were not acted upon. After the Republican chairman of the Judiciary Committee declared that the FBI's confidential report had found no corroboration of the allegations, Kavanaugh was narrowly confirmed by the Senate in October. Forbes' emotionally compelling testimony and the belief among many women of both political parties that she had been treated unfairly, galvanized by the Me Too movement of survivors of sexual assault, and reinforced perceptions of the Republican Party and the Trump administration as being insensitive to women's concern. Meanwhile, Trump defended Kavanaugh as a victim of persecution and condemned that Me Too movement had created a dangerous climate for men. Trump also successfully appointed a record number of appellate court judges, filing several seats that had been left vacant by the refusal of Mitch McConnell and other Senate Republicans to confirm most of Obama's appealing appellate court nominees during the last 2 years of Obama's presidency. Trump's judicial appointments were generally extremely conservative, while mostly white, male, and young, less than 50 years old, ensuring that they would serve for several years or even decades. Their generally quick confirmations on usually party-line voters helped to further Mitch McConnell's long-standing project of transforming the federal judiciary, particularly in the appellate level, into a conservative bulwark against future Democrat legislation and policy making. By September 2019, nearly 25% of the country's appellate court seats were occupied by Trump's appointees.